Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our special council meeting for Thursday, April the 15th. And I'd like to take this opportunity to call it to order. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, before we do not have to go into closed session, and before I hand it over to our delegation, I just want to take this opportunity to welcome a few people to the screen. Certainly everybody has been able to meet and know Stuart Finlater from Finlater and Associates Inc. over the last, I guess, year or so, and the work that he's been doing to support us. So welcome, Stuart. But I also want to welcome, of course, Dan Fitzgerald, our planner, but Abby Heddle from the county, and she's a planner with Middlesex County. And I don't believe some of my colleagues, my council members, have met Abby. I'm not going to go around and introduce everybody directly to you, Abby, but I will just get them to raise their hand. Deputy Mayor Dave Manders, Councillor from Ward 1, Daniel Regan, from Ward 2, Peter Masterakis, and from Ward 3, Alex Westman. So it's great to have you, Abby, join us this morning. And as always, Dan, it's great that you're with us. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good morning to council and staff. I earlier this week was able to submit the draft background report to Mr. Raymer, and I hopefully everyone's had a chance to have a look at that. I'm going to do about a 15-minute presentation this morning, just outlining the sort of high-level review of the draft report, and hopefully get some feedback from council as to any comments or issues or concerns you may have with the report. And then the next step in the process will be to have some virtual open houses, which we'll set up in the next couple of weeks to allow members of the public the opportunity to provide input into the document. I understand it's been posted on your website already at this point, so hopefully people are having a look at it and we can get some feedback in the next couple of weeks from the public. So this morning, basically, the presentation outline, which is the next slide. Basically going to introduce who's been involved in the process. We'll give a quick overview of the municipal comprehensive review. We'll then get into the data findings, which is kind of the meat of the project, and then open up for discussion with council after that, and then discuss the next steps that we will be taking to hopefully complete this project in the near future. So next slide, the team member, basically myself, I was the project manager, had assistance through the whole process from Abby from the County of Middlesex, and Alexandra put together all of the mapping that you see in the background report. So next slide is an overview of the municipal comprehensive review. So every 5 years, municipalities are required to have a look at their official plan to determine if they require any changes to it. The last official plan in review in Luke and Biddulph was back in 2015, so we're pretty well on schedule for that review. We need to ensure that the plan reflects current provincial policy and also make sure it provides a policy framework to guide growth over the next 25 years out to 2046. So the main purpose of this MCR was to review the settlement area designations and determine, based on growth projections, if there was enough land currently designated to accommodate that growth, or whether there would need to be additional lands added to the settlement areas. And that's really the main purpose of the whole review. So as far as policy and land use framework, again, the document has to be consistent with, it says conform with, should be consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform with the County Middlesex official plan, and address any emerging issues such as housing growth, service constraints, and so on. So again, the PPS 2020, it basically provides land use planning and managing growth and development in Ontario while protecting natural resources based on a 25-year horizon. In terms of growth management, the PPS generally directs growth to areas located within urban settlement areas which have full services. So in this case, in Luke and Biddulph, the two Two settlement areas that have full services, as you're well aware, is Lucan and Granton. The Middlesex County official plan recognizes Lucan and Granton as the two service settlement areas, and it has policies which encourage local municipalities to support intensification and redevelopment opportunities, alternative forms of housing for special needs groups, and housing for lower and moderate incomes. And in order to accomplish that, it requires 15% of all development to occur by way of intensification and redevelopment, and to have 20% of development to occur by way of, 20% of development to be affordable. And the county plan defines affordable as 10% below the average purchase price of a resale unit in the regional market area. So that's the policy framework which we're working under. Of course, you have your local Lucan-Biddulph official plan, and it currently has an approach that promotes modest growth and controlled growth. And it directs, again, future residential development to the existing settlement areas that have the facilities and infrastructure, to accommodate that additional growth. Okay, so we move on to the summary of data, which is the next slide. So what I'm going to do briefly is just go over the historic growth patterns and housing starts in Lucan-Biddulph. We'll then have a look at Watson and Associates population and housing, the demand projections. They completed that study in December of 2020 for the County of Middlesex. And that looked at all local municipalities and had projections in terms of both population and housing. Then have a look at the current development proposals and the vacant land supply that's available in each settlement area. And then come up with, and we'll talk about the estimated land requirement for anticipated development. And that's really the key issue here. After that, we'll have a quick look at the requests for people to have their land included in the settlement area, which was pretty well everyone who owned land around Lucan. And then finally have a look at the opportunities and constraints to expansion of the settlement area. Okay. All right, so quickly, the next slide is historical population for the Lucan-Biddulph. So you can see that over the 15-year period from 2001 to 2016, the township's population grew by about 500 people, or 31 people a year. The next slide looks at historical housing starts. So from 2013 up till 2020, the average about 61 units a year were being constructed. If you look at the last 4 years or so, from 2017 up to 2020, that average goes up to over 80, or just around 80 a year. So the development activity has really taken off in the last few years, and we would expect that pattern to continue into the future. The next slide shows, and it's hard to see some of these smaller numbers, but what this shows is housing starts by location, and the tall blue line, light blue line in every one of these years is Lucan. So over the last 8-year period, all but 34 units have been built in Lucan, and that's been 489 units have been built, and only 34 of them have been outside of the village of Lucan. In the last 5 years, there's been only 2 residential permits issued in Clandeboye, and only one residential permit has been issued in Granton in the last 7 years. So this graph really shows that majority, almost all the growth is taking place as far as residential development in Lucan. There's actually been more houses built in the rural areas than in Granton and Clandeboye combined. So although the official plan indicates Granton is an area that growth could occur in, it's certainly doesn't appear that it's been occurring there in any way over the last number of years. So Lucan is the area that growth is taking place. So this is the information that the Watson and Associates provided to the county regarding Lucan-Biddulph. So what Watson Associates did was they did a low growth projection, a base growth projection, and a high growth projection for each of the local municipalities. And Watson and Associates suggests that Lucan Badolf is poised to experience strong growth in both population and housing over the time period of this plan through to 2046. The high forecast attempts to capture potential of within Ontario migration, which is occurring in southwestern Ontario. And what that basically means is there's a large number of people moving from, highly urbanized centers, Toronto and other areas, out to smaller municipalities. And that trend is occurring all across southwestern Ontario, and Watson and Associates believes that's going to continue into the future. Also, based on recent building activity and interest from the development community, it is recommended that Lucan Badolf utilize the high scenario for the purpose of this municipal comprehensive review. So the data that I provided here and on the next few slides is from the high scenario, which is what I recommend council use. So as far as the makeup of the population, the average age of the population in Lucan is getting older, and that's not unlike the rest of the province. Ultimately, the aging population will place a downward pressure on population growth, labor force participation, while at the same time increasing demand for housing, amenities, and community services in areas such as Lucan. So what that's essentially saying is you're likely going to be getting younger families moving in that will require infrastructure to accommodate that. So this slide shows the projected persons per unit in Lucan Badolf. And what that really means is it's the ratio of the total population divided by the total households. And as again, you can see, and this is a trend that's happening all across the province, is the persons per unit is going down. So in 2021, it's about 2.73 persons per unit, and that is anticipated to drop to about 2.55 in 2046. So given this scenario, which is likely to occur in Lucan Badolf, Watson projects the 2046 housing forecast will result in 2,780 total households in the low scenario, and up to 3,410 in the high scenario. So again, we're suggesting that Lucan Badolf should use the 3,410 forecast, which is an increase of about 1,370 units over the 25-year period. Okay. So just to have a look at the current development proposals and vacant land supplies. So this table provides a summary of potential and existing building lots and blocks in proposed draft approved and registered plans of subdivision within the township. And this is information is up until December 31st, 2020. So there may be some slight changes in this at this point, but it's just obviously all of these existing plans of subdivision and condominium are located within the village of Lucan. So if you can, if you look at the bottom numbers there, based on the plans that have been submitted, there's about 300 low density units proposed, 324 medium density, and 136 high density. So the high density would be, the small apartment buildings. The medium would be your townhouses or condos, and the low would be your single unit dwellings. So if you look at the numbers there, that's a significant number of lots and units that you already have available for growth within the village of Lucan. It's like 760 units. So I mean, if you're averaging 70 to 80 permits a year, you've got a pretty good supply for the next few years there. That does not take into account as well the undeveloped lands that are designated for residential growth in Lucan and in Granton and Clandeboye. So, in Lucan, as well as these 760 units, you've got about another 10 hectares of vacant land that can be utilized for development. In Granton, there's about 22 or 23 hectares of lands that are designated for residential development that are not developed on yet. And then there's about 6 hectares in Clandeboye. So, I mean, there's a fair bit of land available already within these designated settlement areas for growth. And the goal is to look and see, based on the growth projections, is that enough land or do we need additional lands? So the next slide here, and again, it's small, it's larger in the actual background report. What this shows is the location of the development proposals and the vacant land within Lucan. So you can see from the chart at the bottom that the green or light brown areas are the vacant residential lands. The solid red is the vacant commercial lands that are available right now in the village of Lucan, and you can see that the lots and the units in the applications that are before Lucan Biddulph right now, and that's where the numbers from the previous chart can come from. So if we were to take into consideration all that information, and I'm doing this at a very high level, it's much more detailed in the background report, but you look at all of the existing units that are available, you look at the vacant land that's also available, and if we base the development on 12.5 units per hectare, okay, to accommodate the new growth, that is a low number, but given the direction of the Lucan official plan that wants to keep modest and small town feel, we feel that is not it's not inappropriate to use that type of density. I know some of the recent developments in the northeast area, they're coming in probably closer to 15 units per hectare. But so 12.5 units is what we've based it on. And if we base it on that number over the next 25 years, we've determined that we would need an additional 55 hectares of land to accommodate the anticipated growth. So that's not a lot. It's about 135 acres of additional land over the next 25 years should be able to accommodate the anticipated growth. Yeah. So next slide is so that's really the key finding of the report, is that it's about 55 hectares that will be required. So if we go to the next slide, it shows the requests for land to be included in the settlement area, and I think there's another additional one that Ron received earlier this week, which isn't in this chart, but the majority of the landowners existing in the village of Lucan obviously have requested their lands be brought into the settlement area as part of this review. And obviously we can't justify that. The province requires you justify the land when you're going to expand out into the rural area, because you're taking farmland out of production, and they don't want that happening until you actually need the land. So, the total number of hectares from these dark purple areas is about 245 hectares, just over 600 acres. So council's got to decide where they want to bring this additional 55 or so hectares into the village. And clearly not everyone's going to be happy. And that's not unusual for a project like this. Everybody wants to get their land put into the settlement area, but it's just not possible. So the next slide shows, again, this is a constraints or opportunities summary. So, in terms of constraints, there's things like planning constraints, which is buffers around sewage lagoons, 300-meter buffer around commercial grain handling facilities. There's buffers required around portable asphalt plants, for example. And then you've got the minimum distance separation formulas, which have to be considered if there's livestock buildings or structures. So those are certainly constraints. There's environmental constraints. So if you have wetlands or woodlots, streams with setbacks, those sort of things, municipal drains, those are all constraints that have to be taken into consideration. The other issues which are critically important in sort of having a look at where best to expand the settlement area is obviously your infrastructure. So your sanitary sewage infrastructure, where is it? How big is it? Can it accommodate growth in a certain area? Would it require a pump station in certain areas where it could be gravity flow in others? So those sort of things were taken into consideration. water infrastructure. Is there readily available water in each of the areas that have been requested to be brought into the settlement area, or is there additional work would be required to accommodate that? Stormwater infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, all of those things, need to be looked at. And so BM Ross had done a high level, review of this and submitted that to the municipality back in 2019. And that's sort of where this information is derived from, as well as discussions with your staff, in addition to what BM Ross had completed a couple of years ago. So all of that information, cultural resources, social resources, all of those things were looked at in order to provide council with some direction as to where we felt the most, reasonable and appropriate area to expand at this time is. And so generally, as you can see from this map, the lands to the northeast of the current urban boundary have the fewest constraints to future growth. These areas are generally free of environmental constraints, other than, there's a couple of woodlots, in that green area at the northeast. From a planning perspective, there are fewer livestock barns and or manure facilities in this area. The area, through discussions with Jeff, could be serviced by municipal water fairly easily. And it's likely that the sewage could be conveyed by gravity to the Chestnut Street pumping station, or by trunk sewer to the wastewater treatment plant. The area is also well connected to arterial roads such as Saintsbury Line and Fallen Drive. And the lands are within walking distance of the elementary school and located close proximity to the proposed cycling routes. To lands to the south of Lucan, for potential lands, it's limited by availability of water and distance from community destinations and schools, and potential MDS setbacks. And future development in this area may be limited due to the presence of, there's two wetland complexes south of the village at this point in time. The lands to the west of the village, along the north side of William Street, there may be some opportunity for growth. However, it may be limited by proximity of livestock operations to the west. Water could be supplied to this area from the trunk water main along William Street, but further investigations would be required to determine if sewage would need to be pumped along William Street. Northwest of Lucan, so along Highway 4, potential expansion is likely limited by MDS setbacks requirement, as well as infrastructure considerations. The area is somewhat isolated from a large water main for supply, and it's downstream of the sewage treatment infrastructure. So it's likely that the sewage would need to be pumped from this area into the existing sewage collection system west of Coursey Line. And development further to the west is limited by the presence, or to the north is limited by the presence of the Little Ausable River Valley and the associated hazard lands. So given all of those factors, it appears that based on the number of infrastructure, social planning, and environmental considerations, the most likely areas to support future residential is at the northeast end of Lucan. So that's the conclusion that I've come up with at this point. Certainly the other areas are capable of sustaining development at some point. It's just there's issues that would need to be addressed more so than that northeast area at the top end of Lucan. So with that quick overview, Your Worship, I'd open it up to any comments or questions, concerns before we look at the next steps.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. I appreciate the high level presentation. Questions? I think I see Councillor Regan's hand up.
Hi, thanks, Madam Mayor. Hi, Stuart. I have a number of questions, but I'm just going to start with one, and then I'm just going to think about the other one. So I'm looking at your map about the good opportunities, some opportunities, and constraints. And unless I missed it, and I understand what you're saying, but I'm wondering with, say, Clandeboye and Granton, I'm not seeing that on the map. And are there no good opportunities there? Because I'm thinking, when you're thinking about growth, I don't want to, we can't exclude those areas, I don't think. So is that not good opportunities? I don't even see those marked here.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering why that's not included.
Sure. We'll start with Clandeboye. So Clandeboye does not have sanitary sewage, municipal sanitary sewage available at all. So any large scale development at this point in time requires municipal services. So Clandeboye is not, it's not identified as a settlement area. It's a hamlet, and its intention is to basically just accommodate limited growth, so small infilling or maybe severing of lots inside the settlement area. So that's why Clandeboye does not show up on here. It's reviewed in the actual background report itself, but for the purpose of this presentation, it wasn't included. Similarly with Granton, in discussions with your staff, and again, there was a report completed by BM Ross. It's submitted to the municipality earlier this year. It basically indicated, there's some issues, potential issues with the actual treatment facility, that it's a bit dated. I know there was an update done to it a few years back, but it's costly to operate in relative terms. So we've basically taken the approach that we don't feel that Granton is an area that is suitable to accommodate any future large-scale growth. There is, like I said, 23 hectares of land inside the settlement area right now that's not being developed. So they have, based on the permits issued over the last number of years, they've probably got enough inside there to accommodate 100 years growth based on past trends, because there's really not been any activity in that area. So, based on those factors, we did not feel that those areas, either one of those areas, was suitable for any expansion.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a follow-up, Madam Mayor? Or just a secondary question. And then a report, you talk about using the high scenario, using the high numbers. And my question, I'm a bit of a stats person. So the question with that is that if you're looking at the current trends of housing and you're projecting this to 2046,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure I'm understanding the math when it comes to using those high projections, because at some point this will end. That growth is going to, and it always does. Historically, so I'm just wondering why we're using those high projections. Thank you.
Using the high projections on the report from C.N. Watson, they're suggesting that Luke and Badolf will experience this high level of growth for a number of years. It doesn't mean it's going to be 80 units or 90 units a year for the next 40 odd years. What it means is that for the next few years, if few is relative, and it could be 5 years, could be 10 years, they're projecting the higher growth to continue and then slow down as you get closer out to the 2046. So, if you average it out at 90 or so for the first 10 years, back down to 70 or so, and then back down to 50 or so, that's the rationale. I don't have the specific numbers right in front of me, but that's the approach they've taken. They're not anticipating a consistent upward growth. In fact, they're predicting it'll be consistently high now, and it'll gradually slow down as they move forward.
All right, great. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I was muted. Councillor Westman.
Yeah, so I'm the ward councillor for Ward 3, which has our village of Granton in it. And we do have some proposed infilling and a small development kind of in the works. It's not on the books yet, but it's certainly in the works. So, I want to make sure that I get this straight for our people in the community here. We're not excluding Granton by any means. We're just saying that most of the development is going to happen in the Lucan area, which is clear and obvious. but I just don't want our anyone viewing this or later viewing it later to get the idea that we're stalling any kind of opportunity for growth in the Granton area, because that's not the case at all. And you know, we do have some lands around the village itself that would be, I guess, good for development. Just there wouldn't be any large scale. It wouldn't be, you know, hundreds of homes, because the waste treatment plant, although it has capacity, it's kind of a dated, expensive facility to operate. But yeah, just want to be sure that we're sending that message that there is still a little room for some growth in Granton. But again, most of the growth has to happen in Lucan, because that's where it's being done. So
yeah,
all ahead.
If I can respond to that, absolutely, Councillor Westman. That there's no plans to restrict growth or, you know, down designate that land. I have indicated in the main background report that council may want to consider at some point in the future, if you need additional lands for the Lucan area, you may want to look at that at some point in the future, but not recommending anything like that right now. And certainly they've got more vacant land in Granton than they do in Lucan. So that land is free to develop in accordance with the official plan and zoning that's in place, and there should be no issue with that.
You're good with that, Councillor Westman? No follow-up? Deputy Mayor Manders.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I'm just going to start off with a couple. So Stuart, and I guess one question for you. The amount of units that are going to be available just with existing projects plus the land that is available to build on in Lucan, maybe some of it's not you know, worthy for the developer to develop because of, you know, its cost. But it just, when I listen to you, it just seems like I'm wondering, are the developers creating this sense of urgency to get this done more so than us needing to get this done? Like, it just, you know, when I listen to you and I see your report, you know, we don't really have a sense of urgency. Has this been falsely created?
Through your worship, developers are in the business of building homes and developing properties, and they take risks in acquiring lands that they, you know, will anticipate development taking place on at some point. You know, most of them are hoping that some point is now or sooner rather than later. But as a municipality, I think, you know, you're right. You know, developers' goals and plans are not always in line with what municipal councils want to see happen in their municipality. So, you know, is there an urgent need to expand the settlement areas at this point in time? I think, you know, you've got enough land, I would say, for the next 6 or 7 years growth, what is available now. But what we are looking at is over the 25-year horizon. And, you know, as the PPS, it's 15 years supply of designated lands. You don't have that at this point in time. You would basically run out of that, I would suggest, in, you know, 10 or 11 years, you know, or sooner. I mean, if development happens as quickly as people are thinking it's going to happen right now, then, you know, you'll need more land sooner rather than later. So I don't think you're being pressured into this. You may be pressured into a decision as to which lands you want to include, because everybody's going to want their lands brought in. But I think it's prudent to look at this expansion as something that you should do at this point in time. It's just a question of where do you want that to happen.
Okay. Another question, a good point there that you made that concerns me is the developers or the, you know, landowners aligning up with our goals and supporting, if we support future residential growth to their areas, and they've decided to go out and buy land, it doesn't matter, you know, Tavistock, Glencoe, wherever outside our community, and infrastructure is very expensive, and we have pullback in our economy, and we have a $5 million sewer plant that goes up, and we designate the lands, and they go, well, that's nice. You're kind of late. We've got other developments and incentives to build elsewhere. What opportunities do we have to reapply? Like, I'm very concerned. And again, it's not about the existing owner of the land, because we don't know who will own that in time. So the conversations we have with them, to me, means nothing. We've already had 2 public open meetings on 2 big projects in Lucan to the public on a proposals that changed dramatically some things in our community that both have sold property. So I don't get hung up. It's really an eye opener for me not to get hung up on the person or the developer, as we've just seen that you just can't get caught up in that. So my concern is applying the land that supports our infrastructure that doesn't align with the developer at the time. How do we protect ourselves?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I'm not sure I have the answer for that. Development is going to occur in and around Lucan. That's a given. I know that your sewage treatment plant at this point, and Jeff maybe correct me on this if he's able to or interested in, but I think the last information I had was that the existing plant can accommodate an additional, I think it was 600 units. You've got 760 units in Lucan right now that are being approved. So you're going to have to expand that plant, and unfortunately, you can't expand it by 50 units. It's an expansion that'll double the size of the plant likely, and you're going to have to do that in any event. So whether you designate additional lands now or not, that sewage treatment plant expansion, I believe, and Jeff and maybe Ron can speak up, but I believe that's going to happen in any event, and you'll be ready for development if and when it occurs.
No, and I agree with you. What my concern is, the support of where we put the future residential land doesn't align with that, and we don't get the charges to start paying for that plant because that developer has decided to go elsewhere or isn't prepared to invest in our community at that time and wants to wait 4 or 5 years. It's a foregone conclusion. We need to invest in our sewer plant by $5 million. How do we protect ourselves if the developer at that time isn't ready when we are ready to go green light with the sewer plant? Like right now, it's a developer can say, hey, you guys weren't ready at the time when I was ready. Now I've gone to Tavistock, Glencoe, wherever, and I'll be 5 years. Thank you for applying the 145 acres to my property. I'll start building in 5 years. And we go, we need somebody to start paying for the sewer plant. Sewer plant's going to be expanded. My question is, how do we protect ourselves and on designating that land and the developer's not ready at that time to invest? It's huge investment on infrastructure that they've already got investments in Ontario.
Yeah. And the answer to that, Councillor Manners, is you can't. There's nothing you can do. You can't force a developer to build at any time that they're not prepared to build.
But can we put a time limit on reapplying it elsewhere? And we got 600 acres or whatever it is applied. Can we at that time though then say, okay, we're ready to go. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves to say, okay, if you're not ready to invest, we're going to reapply that elsewhere? We've got a great opportunity with all this people that want to develop in our community.
Yeah. And certainly that's what this process is all about, right? So if in the future, somebody is not looking to develop and they're within the settlement area, municipality can, shift lands around as long as you don't add additional lands other than, what's required at the time. So if you simply put, you can, and swap's probably not the right term, but you can swap lands around within limits that if somebody's ready to go and they're not in the settlement area at a particular point in time, and somebody is and they're not going, you can, as a municipality, pass a official plan amendment that would realign the boundaries. You'd get appeals from the people that you're down designating, but it can be done. It's just, can you defend it, and can you convince people that's the right thing to do?
I think, yeah, and we probably with our investment in our sewer plant, which we got to do, that'd be very, potentially defendable. And then one last question: constraints in our community after we do apply 135 acres, all of us know when we throw up our hand without protecting ourselves in the future, we're going to have real issues at full build out in 25 years of recreation, whether it be baseball diamonds, soccer fields, everything at that time. Is there any way during the applying this land that we've already talked about, if we need maybe potentially land for a fire hall, like we'll need more land. Can we negotiate purchasing of property, at applying this land with the developer at that time, or somehow say, hey, this build out is going to cost, we're going to need 15 acres and we would like to secure this land now for future council so that they're not in the situation we've been left in?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's no real way you can, sort of play, let's make a deal with a landowner to say, we'll put you in if you give us 15 acres for recreational purposes. You can acquire, parkland as part of a subdivision agreement, or you can get cash in lieu of parkland to do it somewhere else. But I'm not aware that would be something that you could easily do.
See, I was, we've seen all the properties that are potentially with restraints or non-restraints to our services. I don't, this will be last time not the last time I speak maybe, but I'm sitting here thinking, should we be almost request, I'm maybe not going to phrase this right in the government world, but request for proposal for what's best for our community to each of the land people and say, okay, these are the lands that our staff feels that are developable, and these are our needs at the end of this 25-year build out. And what can you give our community in a public process to help that we're not restrained in 25 years, so that everything's very open, so that then we literally have, an audition basically with these people that own the land saying, you know what, we'll give you 15 acres, you apply this. I mean, we're talking when we pass this, we're about to apply a multiple of realistically, we're about to add $14 million to their portfolio after we apply this.
Yeah, and again, I mean, if a developer comes forward and says, I'll donate so much land to the municipality, that's fine. But I don't think it's the municipality can demand that. I know that's not what you're saying, and I'd have to think about what you put forward there, Councillor Manders. But I understand what you're saying, and I'm just not sure I've got the answer today.
Right now. Yep.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Just circling back, and maybe for my clarification, Deputy Mayor, like you're not saying like a quid pro quo that will designate in area A if area A developer says this. What are you saying? Like after the designation, is there an opportunity to
quid pros
us to get that land? Like, I'm a little confused.
Yeah, quid pro seems a little bit, almost not very nice way to say it. So basically that is what I'm saying, but in a public open forum that is not in camera, that we have, yes, that the developers that we're going to apply, that's stated on that map, that in a public forum, they would come to council, come to our staff and say, we think we're the best property to be designated for your community because we are willing to offer this, an acre for your fire hall, 15 acres for soccer. We are going to do very well in this development. And we think it's the best area. And yes, in an open public forum. Yes. Yep. So what basically applying the land that we feel meets our community needs and aligns with us, that aligns with our community.
Okay. And you didn't have any follow-up at the moment? Okay. I see Dan's hand up. Maybe he's got some thoughts.
Through the chair, yeah, no, thank you. I've remained quiet. So I think I may just offer one thing for council's consideration, just given the discussion that's occurring, and just to be cognizant. So there will still be a public meeting where everyone will be invited to speak about their specific lands, whatever they want to do with it, and why they feel that their land should be included for consideration in the settlement boundary expansion. So that has not occurred yet. That will still occur. So that will give them the open opportunity to discuss their lands with council in the public forum. But just be cognizant from the perspective of planning, our recommendation is based off of the background research that we do. So we can't take into consideration things like pro quos. We look at the hard facts, the hard services, the availability, the land suitability, and then even soft services. We don't look at those other factors. So our recommendations will be based on that from a professional planning opinion, not on these other factors. So I just wanted to make that clear to council.
Okay, appreciate that, Dan. Did you have any follow-up from that comment at all, Dave, or that's just good information to have?
Yeah, no, that is good information to have. So be interested to see what the developers do offer our community. We put up our hands to vote, so understand what you look at, and you got to understand what I look at when I put up my hand. So yeah, I agreed. Yeah.
Any other comments? Councillor Mastarakis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Stuart, question along the lines of the deputy mayor, the first one on the financial side. So now that we've got statistics, we've got the numbers that are suggesting that we should grow, can we do our financial analysis done to show, okay, we're 90% assured that we'll get the first sewage treatment plant, right? With the numbers we have today covered by development costs, let's say, potentially. After that, to maybe the deputy mayor's point, we don't know what the growth will be. Our analysis done to say, okay, here's where you'd have to get to. And if you don't get to that point, whether it's a shock from a developer saying, I'm not building anymore, or an economic shock where things slow down, then does it, we'd obviously, I assume, have to go to our line of credit with the government to fund that. So are those interest costs, are they development costs? And do we want to look at, what's our backup line of credit? Is that what happens through municipal government, that you go to your line of credit to fund the shortfall if you don't have growth in those periods? That's the first question.
Well, it's probably more a treasury question than a planning question, but certainly from my experience, usually the municipality will debenture for a large project such as that, and you'll pay it out over 25 years and you'll collect the money back from the developers as development takes place. If development doesn't take place at the pace you're expecting, then yeah, you're going to have to some way or another collect those funds other than from the developer.
And are those interests, I guess it would be interest costs potentially on us, or it'd be the taxpayers funding that?
Maybe wrong.
Will those costs be able to go to development costs?
Are you asking Councillor Mastarakis if the interest charges can be included in the development charges?
Right.
If I may, Madam Mayor, to answer that question slightly, I understand what you're asking, Councillor, but it's not that simple. It's over the span of the lifetime of payments. And so yes, in fact, when you expand the plan, and we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but anyway, I will explain it. We talk about the expansion of the plant being 1 train or 2 trains. So 2 trains would actually double the capacity of the plant. And the question is, do we extend ourselves that far by doing the 2 train expansion as opposed to the single train to take advantage of economies of scale? So it's going to be cheaper now to build 2 trains than it will be to build 1 train now and another train in 10 years, for example. So you have to sort of weigh in your mind whether that benefit the economies of scale, and whether council is willing to take that risk in that development will continue at its current pace or something similar over that span of time. So yes, the costs of the expansion, whether it's 1 train or whether it's 2 train, will be caught in the development charges. But I think the deputy mayor in previous meetings has said his concern is what happens if the development drops off. If we've taken out the mortgage, so to speak, on the expansion costs, just because development drops off and we're not receiving, 91 times the development charge, those payments stay the same regardless of what happens with development. So that, I believe, is the deputy mayor's concern, and I think that's what you're saying here as well. So if the development charges drops below the amount that we have to pay annually to repay that loan, I believe your question is, if we have to borrow that money, is the interest recouped? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, is there some way of recouping that through development charges that you know?
I'm not aware of any. We haven't been in that situation yet, so that's a good question to ask when we get to that point. And probably that question appropriately would be asked during the development charges debate.
Thank you. Second question, when we're talking about the growth and if you have some demographic background, would you be able to provide, I'm thinking of Parks and Rec and the community and walkability, and if we try to be too many things to too many people, that can increase our costs and not allow potential focus for the Parks and Rec department. Is there a way of providing some demographics that, based on the projections, that 5 years, 10 years, 15, will the average household in 15 years be over 65, or will it be families with young children? Do we need a hockey rink in 15 years, or do we need to double the rink in 15 years? Is there something that can, I know it's still long-term projections, but is there something like that we can get that'll help us plan out and look for soccer fields and baseball fields and so forth as it grows?
Yeah, we can certainly get that information. I don't recall if it was in the Watson report. I don't know if Dan, if you do, or Ron, but certainly that information can be made available, and council can have a look at that.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Mazarakis. So that information was actually taken into consideration in Stan Watson's report, and that's kind of where they came up with that finalized high density number. They are projecting that populations in general across southwestern Ontario are aging. We know that. So we don't have as much population replacement as we did in the past. And that's kind of why you're seeing the average number of household numbers that Stuart brought up in the slideshow declining over time.
And my question was around the average ages or something, depending on what maybe Paul can speak to this a little bit, what he might need to look at planning going forward.
Yeah, I did see Paul's hand up, so maybe if you've got something to add, Paul.
I was just going to add, thank you, Madam Mayor. If council would find it beneficial, I can also forward the Parks and Rec master plan, which does reflect age demographic for growth projections, as well as in 2025 is when we're due to redo that as well. So I can also forward that to Stuart if you would find that beneficial to have as well. I can forward it.
And Paul, does that seem to align with what you've heard today so far?
Yes, I believe it does.
Thank you.
Did you have something else, Councillor Mazarakis?
Yeah, one last question. When we were talking about maybe a little bit to Deputy Manager's question again, is the how development looks, and can we put in considerations for like a design development of how the roads look, how the streets look, how park areas look when we're partnering with whoever has the land? Can we put certain community values or look to it of how we want our community to look? Obviously, there's going to be a balance between the developer and the community, but are there things like that we can put in place?
Yeah, I don't know where Ron's going to stand up. I'm not sure if you have a design standards policy manual. If you do, then that's what you would go by. But I think Ron had his hand up there to
yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. The what you're talking about is the design guidelines and construction standards, and Jeff has been talking a while about updating that, about getting Dylan to update those standards. So that's on our to-do list as well.
Would that be and I understand again what Councillor Mazarakis is asking, and I'm thinking about, you know, a public process when essentially those that would be applying for the designation, what they might tell us what their neighborhood would look like. But I guess I'm also saying, would that be something that would be taken on, like, that would be more a discussion that we would have at subdivision approval to say, this is the subdivision that I'm proposing, when they actually come to the table to, talk about what it's going to look like and what the roads are going to look like and where trails might be. Would that conversation happen at that point, or does it happen at the official plan update?
To answer your question, Madam Mayor, it should happen at both points, because it's going to take the developer time and money to design the thing. So they need guidelines in order to prepare that document for council's consideration. So I think the onus is on us to sort of set the standards and then let them sort of design the subdivision, and then we can get into the fine details when it comes to council.
Did you have anything else, Councillor Mastarakis, or was that it at this time? Can I just, before I push it off to, I think Councillor Reagan had his hand up again, just on this design guideline plan, I guess, since Ron, you brought it up, and the updating of it, just quick Cole's note, how does that go about? I don't think we need to spend a lot of time at this meeting about it, but just so that we're kind of aware, is that a long process? Is it like, would it be, I don't know, what would that look like to update that, Jeff? Or do you know at this time?
Maybe I can take a stab at it first and then Jeff can pipe in. We do have a document. It is dated, and it deals with collector streets versus internal residential streets. So there are different designs based on the classification of the road. Again, I think it was done by Dylan, and it was done, I want to say even prior to amalgamation. So it is very dated. It needs to be updated, obviously, but we're not starting from scratch. So I don't think you're looking at a year's worth of time to get that document updated and before council. But I'll let Jeff pipe in.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Mayor. So yeah, and there's a lot of this wouldn't be creating something new in the fact that there's a lot of information out there. I mean, the City of London just updated their some of their design boulevard standards and that sort of thing. So it's not a hard project to do. But I think right now we got to realize that there's two things going on. There'll be the internal design of the subdivision and how we do that, which I think we're talking about right now. But we also got to keep our eye on the ball that Stuart's report and council's thinking is that it's the kind of design of the town we're looking at right now. We can talk about if there's going to be a tree in a boulevard, but right now we're talking about how we really kind of, the town's going to basically look in 25 years. We can talk about boulevards and streets coming up, but I think right now Stuart's plan here for council is how Lucan, or how that look is going to be growth wise, and I think that's important to keep an eye on that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that. Councillor Reagan, did you have a follow-up from earlier or more?
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I do. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking the question, what's in it for Lucan Biddulph every time that we're talking about this. And I'm listening to the Deputy Mayor and to Councillor Mastarakis talking about making sure that we have, these are our needs for land, our Parks and Rec considerations, even as to what the homes are going to look like and those sorts of things. And the planning, and when I look at subdivision plans and these sorts of things, and I'm thinking, why we have to keep asking, we're at a crossroads with our community, and in the next 20 years or 25 years, why does it have to look like every other community? Why can't we look for something different? So we're looking for different types of design and different types of patterns. I'm thinking about the population and demographics. Councillor Mastarakis mentioned the demographics, and how many people in this community are my age or 65 years old, and 10, 15 years from now, I may not want to cut my grass or work on my, work on my lawns. And I still want to live in Lucan. So what kinds of buildings or what kind of homes are we going to have for to provide for people? And again, being on Parks and Rec with Councillor Mastarakis, I mean, that's something too that I'm really concerned about, is that what are we going to be, what do we need? So, and again, going back to the Deputy Mayor's point, Yeah, it's an addition. I like that word. I think, like, and I'll say it, like, we want you to develop in our community. Absolutely. No problem with that. But what's in it for us? I'll ask that question. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Manders.
Stuart, what issues do you see if we were just to apply a 15-year outlook for land, 65, 70 acres as opposed to 135, just in case, we made an error, very hard to reapply, as which I would say elsewhere in the community. It's amazing how at each end of town, we don't know what's going to be proposed or what's going to go up. And, maybe all of a sudden there could be a reflection in the 10 years going, if we would have known that development was there, we maybe would have designated land there in that area. And to apply all the land 25 years out, what's the downside of doing 65 acres and then 15 years, seeing if we made the right decision?
Through your worship, I'm not sure there's necessarily a downside. I mean, the council can designate lands as much or as small as you want based on the data that we've come up with. So the data says you will need 55 hectares by 2046. The PPS says you have to have enough lands designated for growth for 15 years. So if you wanted to put a smaller acreage or apply a smaller acreage, you would be within your rights to do so. I guess the only issue is if the growth does continue the way it's projected to, you'll be looking at adding more land sooner rather than later. I think you look at the data, you look at where the least constraints are and you apply that information to where you want to designate lands now. And it doesn't mean that in 5 years you can't review it. Like, you will be reviewing it within 5 years or sooner. You can do it anytime you want, but you have to do it at least once every 5 years. So you'll be back at the same process 5 years from now. And as you said earlier, if the 55 acres you've designated in, lot A or whatever has not moved ahead, then you might want to look at moving that 55 acres somewhere else, and you might have a need for additional 50 acres somewhere else or 50 hectares somewhere else. It's really a decision that council needs to make. I'm not sure that there's a additional cost if you designate 55 hectares as opposed to 25 hectares of land. The cost that I think you're talking about is the cost of the sewage treatment plant expansion. And as I said, I think Ron said it earlier as well, you're either going to add 1 train or 2 trains, and that's a decision that you'll make shortly. And that's your biggest cost. It's not necessarily where you designate the lands, right? So.
No, because as we've stated, we've probably got 5-6 years of growth now. Half of what we're going to apply would be out 15 years. It's, I know what you're saying. In 5 years, I feel much easier to apply future residential land than reapply and make the phone call saying, we're going to take that away from you. So I would disagree with that in 5 years, we can just reapply it. I don't think that's as easy as a phone call. So I would say applying it in 5 years might be better planning and organizing and everything else. It's interesting. I'm going to get my head around that, because maybe that gets our head around, 1 train, good vision, looking out 15 years out, seeing the impact of our community. Yeah. Anyway, so, okay, very good. You answered my question by really no downside. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I see Councillor Masterakis' hand up, but I don't know if Ron, you had something. I see your hand up. Did you have something off of what that last conversation was about?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So let me paint this picture for you, because I don't think that council should designate less than what we're able to. Okay, and I'll explain why. I think in 5 years, lots of things can change in 5 years, to your point, Mr. Deputy Mayor. If if the growth that's projected, and it's already on the schedule here, there's 300 singles, 324 medium, and 136 high density. If all of a sudden the demand keeps increasing and suddenly we're not doing 90 units a year, we're doing 150 units a year because they are townhouses and they can sell more in a smaller area. So if suddenly over the next 5 years, our growth rate doubles, 5 years, the numbers are going to look vastly different. So when we do that review in 5 years, you're going to have that much more opportunity to designate different areas at that point. So I don't think there's a downside to sort of maximizing what we're able to do at this point. I think to designate less than what you're able to do would be I'm not sure that would financially be the right decision. We paid for a review. This is what we can do. To do less, to designate less than that. And I understand what you're saying if it's in the wrong area, but I'm saying we're not going to go through this process for another 5 years. In 5 years, you have another kick at it at that stage.
Okay, I can't speak for the deputy mayor, but I wonder if maybe he was also not just thinking about a wrong designation, like area designation, but just in the event that there is some sort of change in our economics and growth doesn't proceed as it has been. On the flip side, as Ron said, we have a subdivision that we thought was going to take 9 years to complete, and it was sold out in 6 years. So, we've certainly seen that accelerated growth in the community too. Councillor Mastarakis.
Yeah, Stuart, question. Have you seen any targeted communities? I think, was it Timmins years ago decided to say, we're going to be a retirement community, we're going to build these kinds of structures. I'm not saying we'll do that, but have you seen that set up as 5, 10-year, 15-year goals with communities, and how does that look?
Yeah, I don't have any specifics on that, Councillor Mastarakis. I know there are municipalities that advertise themselves as the ideal retirement community. And that's how they promote themselves. There's communities, that are market, outdoor market type communities, like, in the Bayfield area and in Kitchener-Waterloo area. So, I mean, municipalities can brand and market themselves, however they see fit. But as far as, looking out 5 or 10 or 15 years and what they do with that, I'm not aware of how they undertake that review.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Maybe going back to, what was touched on a few minutes ago about the ability to go back and review. So to be clear, we have to review our official plan every 5 years now, correct?
Yes, you have to hold at least one public meeting to review your official plan. Doesn't mean you have to make any changes,
right,
or anything, but you have to have a public meeting, and anybody who wishes to speak at that can speak at it, and yeah.
So then when it comes to the designation of these lands, so, okay, for the sake of discussion, we decide that we're going to go with the recommendation and we're going to designate the 55 hectares. And of course, that is supposed to do us for what we think the next 25 years. Well, 12 years from now, or maybe that's not even a good number. But anyways, what I'm saying is, how easy is it going to be in the event that we find out sooner, and like relatively sooner than later, that we definitely need more, that there's this massive boom and we're seeing incredible growth? Essentially, do we have to start back at point A that we did going through this process? Or is there a way to take what the data that we've got now and kind of update it to grow, to further designate? Or do we have to start from the beginning again?
I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, but maybe I'll let Dan. Dan's got his hand up.
Through the chair to Madam Mayor. So when it comes to settlement boundary expansions, it's always done through a municipal comprehensive review. So regardless of the situation, if you have to go back and revisit it in say 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever it might be, from the comprehensive perspective of settlement boundary expansion, you're always basically starting back at ground zero. So the only way that you can expand a settlement boundary is through that comprehensive review.
Okay. That is the question. I just didn't have all the proper language. So thanks for that. Okay. And then, so the Watson report, those are projections for 25 years, right?
Yes.
All right, anything else from council at this time? And then I think we want to get into kind of what the next steps are. Deputy Mayor Manders.
Just when will we find out from staff if the province will allow us this volume of land to be applied, or if we have to reapply and take away from Grant and apply it in Lucan?
So the process, probably that's what I'm going to discuss on our next steps here. But once we've completed the public information, public review sessions, right, the virtual open houses, so to speak, we'll have, listen to what the public have to say. We will finalize the draft background report. Council then has to hold a public meeting under the Planning Act to actually make the changes that we want to make, or you want to make. So if, for example, you agree with the 55 hectares being added, you determine where that's going to be, the official plan amendment would be drafted in that manner. There'd be a map and say, here's where we're going to include these lands in the settlement area. That goes to a public meeting. There's discussion amongst council, amongst anybody from the public who wants to attend, and council ultimately makes a decision on that amendment, either approve it or amend it. That information is then sent to the county, because the county is the approval authority on behalf of the province for this type of amendment. And ultimately, the county would either approve or not approve what Lucan-Biddulph Council has submitted. So that's the process that's followed. So that's how it's done. So you determine what you want to do. It goes into the official plan amendment. It's submitted to the county, and the county either says yes or no. And I said they're working on behalf of the province. They're representing the province's interest. They have to make sure that we can justify the 55 hectares based on the numbers and the data that we've provided to them. And you'll find, and if it's approved, it's subject to appeal. So if some member of the public or one of the developers is not happy that their lands didn't get included, for example, they could appeal that to the province, and then you'd have an LPAT hearing to determine who's right and who's wrong, basically.
So going back, I don't know, I gotta.
Just one sec. Dan had his hand up, so he might have something more to add before you move on, if you don't mind.
Through Madam Mayor to Deputy Manders. So maybe just to provide a bit of clarification where that background number came from. So if that's kind of where you're going, I think that's kind of where your initial question came from. The county official plan update is where the CN Watson numbers come from. So that's where the population base was actually reviewed through that county OP amendment process. And through that process, they came out with 3 scenarios, essentially. One was a low growth scenario. One was basically status quo down the middle, and then the high growth scenario. So in this case, as Stuart has alluded to, we are recommending Lucan-Biddulph look at the high growth rate scenario. So that's something that population projection number is something that has already been adopted by county council, and that's what we're working with at the local level to determine what amount of land would be necessary to meet that high level population projection over the next 25 years. So in this case, based on our analysis, that's where that 55 hectares comes from.
It's still not, anyways, I must not be phrasing it right. We then, so if, in my mind only, it's obviously just in my mind, I'd like to leave the designation where it is in the grant and settlement.
That's, I think, what the report is recommending.
What's that?
I think that's what the report is recommending.
Okay, That is what, and then we can apply and then we wait for whether it gets denied or not. Okay, very good. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yes. So through the chair, just maybe to clarify for everyone, the 55 hectares is looking at additional lands that are not currently designated in Lukenbadal. So the Granton lands, the Clandeboye lands, those are already designated. That 55 hectares is everything in addition to what is currently designated. So it doesn't take into consideration removing any lands from any area and adding it elsewhere.
Perfect.
If council did want to consider doing that for the future, then they would be able to take lands out of certain areas and add it to other areas if they so.
Oh, thank you. That's
Okay.
Welcome.
Okay, any other questions or comments before we move on to next steps? I know Stuart kind of talked about it, but I think there's probably more to it. All right, Stuart.
Okay, so the next steps, and I've had some discussions with Ron about this. So the background report, I guess, is already posted on your website, so people can have a look at it. I've just talked with Ron about setting up the public sort of virtual open houses the week of April 26th. So not next week, but the week after. For anybody who wishes to speak directly to us about their lands or the project or have any questions in general about what's being proposed. I will summarize the input received, both written and verbal, from the open houses and provide a final report, background report to council. We'll have some appendixes attached at that point in time. We'll include the written submissions that we've received and any comments we've received and some other information at the back of the report that'll be helpful for council. We'll draft an official plan amendment based on direction from council, and that official plan amendment would be discussed at a public meeting that would be set under Section 26 of the Planning Act, and that's what Dan was referring to earlier. So that is a public meeting that anybody can come and speak to the issue prior to council making any final decision on the amendment. So that's basically the next steps in the process. And if Ron has anything he wants to add, if he's thought any more about open houses or how we can post this information on the website, get people to be aware that it's happening so that nobody says they didn't know anything about it. So the more information we can get out there, the better. So so that's where we're heading, and hopefully, by the next few months we can have this, wrapped up, the OP amendment, before council for consideration, and hopefully get a final decision on it through the county at some point before the fall.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I think you're still on mute there. Through the mayor to Mr. Finlater there, what, if any, are the requirements for notice? Are we required to put a notice in the paper, for example? I know it's on the website, but the concern always is that somebody's going to come out of the woodwork, a month after we send this off to the county for approval and say, I didn't know anything about it. What are the legal requirements for notice, I guess?
Well, you have to give a notice of the public meeting. I think the wording is in a newspaper of general circulation in the municipality. You would post it on your website. You have to have the notice out at least 20 days prior to the meeting taking place. It's just like a regular, like a zoning amendment or official plan amendment that you would, process on a regular day-to-day basis. It's really no different. So there is legal requirements. You need to post it, and I can provide you, a sample or of what that would look like. And yeah, so there definitely are requirements that you have to provide notice, general circulation in the municipality. And again, most places today, they post it on their website, try and get the word out. So.
Do you have anything else, Ron?
No, and I just maybe one quick thing, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I still want Mr. Finlater to say, I don't believe, Stuart, we're taking or down designating any lands. We're predominantly talking about residential here, but really it's not just residential lands in the official plan update. It's supposed to be a comprehensive one. So is there any other topics that we've changed in the document that maybe council should be made aware of, or basically any landowner should be made aware of?
Yeah. So yeah, I just want to reiterate, I thought I had explained that earlier with Councillor Westman's question at the start of the meeting, but yeah, we are not in this review recommending any down designation of Granton or Clandeboye. Those lands that are in those settlement areas or the hamlet areas now are not proposed to be changed in any way. The report does suggest that council may want to look at that at some point in the future if the development trends continue the way they are, which is extremely limited. But you never know. I mean, Granton could take off and you might want to put money into upgrading the system. So no change in any of those areas. The additional lands that we're talking about adding to the Lucan settlement area are for residential purposes. We had discussions with staff regarding the industrial lands and the commercial lands, and we were satisfied that there's no need to increase either of those designations. You have sufficient lands designated industrial in two or three different areas that, Ron and I myself discussed and believe that certainly for the next, 4 or 5 years, we don't see a need to expand that. And again, within Lucan, you've got a fair bit of land designated commercial, and we don't see a need for any increase in that at this point in time. So the main change we'll be looking at is the boundary line adjustment, adding approximately 55 hectares, if that's council's wish, to the village of Lucan.
Just before I saw the deputy mayor's hand up, I just want to go back to the requirements for notice. So I guess aside from just our media notices, those landowners that had put the request in for their lands to be considered, are they notified of this, or is it just by regular media notices, or are they specifically notified?
Well, yeah, we would specifically contact anyone who submitted a written or even a verbal request. I don't think anybody's just done it verbally, but we've had a number of written requests from the 8 landowners that you've seen highlighted on that one map. So we would specifically contact them for the virtual open house, and we would also make sure they got notified of the meeting. Other than that, the most common way of doing it is in the newspaper and on the website for anyone else.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
That was my exact question. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, well, seeing none, I don't mean to speak for you, Stuart, but I assume if anybody, and when I say anybody, any council members continue to review the larger report, if they have any questions, they can address them through Ron to get to you, or so that we can keep, because I'm sure after this, it's been a lot of information for us to digest. I'm sure a lot of us will go back and review it, and if anything comes to mind, we can certainly get that to you. And I'm
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. That's not a problem at all. And that's part of the reason why I was proposing we don't schedule those public information sessions for next week, because I thought we may have some follow-ups and discussions with council. So if anybody has any issues or concerns or questions, by all means, you can contact me directly or contact me through Ron, however you want that to work.
Okay. All right. Well, with Dan.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, just to clarify as well, anyone watching from the general public that has any comments or questions or concerns, please also feel free to contact either Stuart or myself. We can certainly have those discussions as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that clarification. All right. So with that, I guess what I would look for is a verbal motion just to accept for information. Please, Deputy Mayor. And seconded by Councillor Regan. And all opposed to that? And that's carried. Don't believe we have any staff reports, no bylaws. So then I would just ask for a motion to adjourn our meeting at 9:55. And that gives you time, Councillor Westman, to get to your ABCA meeting. So I look for you to move that. And seconded by Councillor Regan. All opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you.